We're ready.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, May 1st, 2020. The time is 9:07 a.m. Calling this meeting to order. It is a special meeting. It's the kickoff of our fiscal year 21 consolidated budget review. Attending are Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? I hear of none. Our first business with potential action items is a review of preliminary summary elements, and our host is our Finance Director, Dina Darrow. Dina, yours is the floor.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm going to hand off to my boss, the clerk, and have him kick off our presentation.
Yes, I want to thank all of the 120 people that sent us the information in a timely manner from all the departments so we can compile it. So all of you county employees, thank you very much for doing that. And I'm not going to call it the kickoff because we're all missing sports. I'm going to say this is the beginning of our budget season. Thank you, Dina. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
So we have a lot of information to cover today. I'm going to move this down a little. That's better. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, that's good. Okay. So thanks, everybody, for coming. Who knew that budgets could be so exciting? Thanks so much for coming. So today we have a presentation. There she is. Thanks, Michelle. We're going to look at the preliminary summary, which is what everybody wants to see, what our deficit is, our starting deficit. And we're going to look at our sticky notes. Those were a big hit last year, so we'll be revisiting those with all of the asks. And Michelle is going to go through and walk you through your working binders with all the documentation for all the asks you see here so that you have a good working relationship with your binder and it will help support your decision making. So here we are. What a ride it's been, right? So I'm going to move over here and let Michelle hit it. So sometimes it's fun to start off a presentation with an inspirational quote. So one of my favorite gurus is Jordan Peterson. And when you have 120 professionals focusing on one thing, you're going to get a really great work product. So I want to thank everybody for stepping outside of their day jobs and focusing on the budget so that we can get to this point. And we're actually presenting this about a week early compared to last year. So considering everything that's going on in the world, this is pretty remarkable. So I want to give kudos to all of our budget comrades out there at the county. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about the elements of the budget. We're going to look at the budget binder, and then we're going to review sticky notes. We have 2 hours set aside for this meeting. I'm hoping that it doesn't take 2 hours because I know everybody's got other things they need to be doing, and it is Friday and it's sunny outside. But I want to make sure that we touch on all the key elements and that there's a general understanding. So if you have a question, maybe you don't know if you want to formulate it in this meeting, just shoot Michelle and I an email via budget admins. We can answer any questions you have, send you any information that you would like to see. So this is an iterative process. This is step one, and we'll be going through step by step. So the budget elements. So I'll give you the highlights in a pretty slide. So this year, property tax is going to have to take on a larger role for our budget because everybody has revised down their revenues in many areas because of what we're dealing with. So what we're thinking is till the end of 2020, we'll probably see less revenue coming in. That could rise up in 2021, but everybody's being very conservative with revenue this year. I think it's good to be doing that. We don't want to get overconfident with our revenue. And so our fund balance use right now that you will see in the preliminary summary is associated with grant positions and some restricted funds that are self-balancing that don't use property tax, but there's very little fund balance, as you can see from that little snippet there right now in our preliminary summary. So this chart represents where we are right now with revenue in the preliminary summary. So expenses. So personnel is our biggest expense. Right now, we're at about $65.5 million. That's loaded for the whole county, everybody included. That's as of last night. That's about $3.8 million over last year. That has to do with the wage study, and it has to do with our increase in benefits. That's fully loaded, so our medical is in there. That's what's driving that increase. Our average payroll every 2 weeks, the county portion, $2.5 million every 2 weeks. That's why it's so important that we have some fund balance on reserve in our working capital to make sure that we make that payroll every 2 weeks. So it's a pretty big number. So when we start looking at budget numbers, just keep in mind to frame the numbers you're looking at. Our payroll is $2.5 million every 2 weeks out the door. So our most recent estimate of benefits from our folks over at Alliant is about $1 million, a little over $1 million. That estimate was taken with February data. That'll be revised when Alliant comes, and you all got a schedule of our upcoming budget meetings. There are 2 budget meetings where Alliant will be present, and the first one is coming up the end of this month. So if you want to tune in or come and attend, they will be talking about where our medical costs are going, and that will affect our personnel costs. So current operating, amended, without grants, is about $26.5 million, whole county. So our proposed operating budget, everybody got 2%, but a lot of people cut. So in total, we're under $120,000 for the entire county as an increase to operating. So everybody was very good about looking at their budgets, cutting where they could, and giving back to the county for the good of everyone. So considering the size of the county and the size of our budget, that's a 0.12% increase year over year. It's pretty minimal, very impressive, not only for an organization this size, but an organization that is led in kind of a siloed way. We don't have a centralized management, so each elected official has taken it upon themselves to look at their budgets and really look hard at their expenses. So kudos to the electeds and to their departments. I should get the clicker. So the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk about a couple of specific things. Yeah. Where are my cards? I had another card. Oh, is it hiding? I had a card. Is it in my pocket? Sorry. Ah, there it is. Thank you, Michelle. She saves me every day. Okay, so there were 2 questions posed recently about the budget, about benefits, and the other about overtime. So I included a slide that is dedicated to each of those items. So I wanted to, again, give you some context as to what our benefits cost. So estimated based on what Alliant told us, our medical, dental, vision per employee, and what we do is we just take the whole increase, the whole expense of the employer, and we just divide it by the number of enrolled employees, and then we send that money to each department to pay for benefits. So as of this year, our estimation is it's about $14,100 per employee that it costs the county for medical benefits. So that gets tacked on to the cost of that employee. When I started 4 years ago, can't believe it's been 4 years, right? I started at the county 4 years ago. That cost was about $10,000. So this is a 70% increase. So that's a huge driver of our costs. So in addition to medical per se, the percentage has gone up for the employer and the employee. So against every single gross wage, you either have, for non-sworn, 11.94% of that is being paid for by the county for benefits, and for sworn, it's 12.28% on every single employee that's eligible for PERSE, which is most folks. And then our sick leave, we have a really great plan for anybody who's separating from the county. If they have sick leave, and depending upon how long they've been here, we pay into what's called a VEBA account. So their sick leave up to a certain point, and it's a max of 480 hours, gets popped into a special account at the state. It's tax-free to help pay for their medical insurance. It's like an HSA that they can take with them. So we pay that out every year to employees that separate that are eligible for that. That's another added cost. that we have, and we do have quite a few retirements this year. You'll see it on one of our sticky notes. We have some retirements, about $156,000 we're estimating in retirements, and a big piece of that is that VEBA. So on average now, for every single employee, you can look to 46 to 59% loading percentage on that employee's wages. We have very rich benefits. Okay, come on, there we go. Okay, so then the other part of this is overtime, and I have some stats for overtime. Keep in mind, we have about 800 employees. Employees eligible for overtime is about 674 of those employees. The rest are exempt and don't get overtime. So in 2019, the county paid $1.5 million in overtime. And that represents 55,436 hours worked. It's a lot of overtime. And if you were to split that up at $75,000 a pop, that's just over 20 employees. We have a lot of open positions, and the people that are working a lot of hours. This is a huge cost because we're paying time and a half rather than straight time. So just to get an idea of how this lays out, 33 employees of those employees made over $11,000 last year in overtime. 3 employees worked over 1,000 hours of overtime. It's a lot of hours of overtime. 39 employees' annual wages were increased by 20%, 7 by 30%, and 3 by over 50%. So we have some people that are working very, very hard, and it's costing us a lot of money. We need to look at those open positions, and we need to figure out how to fill those positions because the cost to the county is very high. We have to pay taxes on that. We have to pay benefits on that. We have to pay PERSI on that. So,
can you take us back to the previous slide, please?
Sure. Michelle, help. Yes.
Last bullet, on average, the loaded rate on salaries is 46 to 59%. We typically use an uplift of 20%.
It's not true anymore.
Yeah, but more than doubled?
Mm-hmm. That's what our average is right now.
How did that happen?
Medical.
I mean, even just last year, correct me somebody if I'm wrong.
It was understated.
It was
understated.
Yet if I look at year-to-date how we're tracking in terms of revenue versus expenses.
And it varies.
We're actually under budget overall as a county.
Yes, but it's skewed because the higher that medical goes, the higher the rate is for lower paid employees. So it's all over the place with the loading, but on average, that's the rates we're looking at.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty high. Am I not on? What's going on here? Okay, so any questions on overtime? I think I kind of beat it up, but basically we have a lot of overtime, so that's something to be looking at.
Yeah, something.
I'm still a little bit confused. When we're trying to, figure out loaded salary, we usually use 22% or thereabouts.
Right.
I mean, just for going forward, are you saying we should be using between 46 and 59?
Yes, 22% was used in 2017. And in 2017, our medical overhead was between $10,000 and $11,000 per person, and our PERSI rate was lower. So it's going to vary per person, but when you're figuring those, we do have templates that we can share with you, and you can pop those numbers in, and you can get a very accurate calculation per employee. I think because we're seeing so much variability, it's important to be more precise, and we can provide that information to the groups when they're doing that.
Anyone else? No? Go ahead.
Okay. So at a very high level, this will be on our preliminary summary. I just wanted to give it to you in a picture format. Personnel asks this year, $2.3 million. And that includes new positions, bonus pool increases, some grade changes, special duty pay, and some overtime. Our operating expense, again, up less than $120,000 for the whole county, which is very impressive. And our capital asks are a record low this year. I think everybody is being observant of our current situation and was very modest in their capital asks this year. So actually, about 4.4 million is actual tax supported capital. The rest, 2.1 is solid waste enterprise fund. So I'm going to hand it off to Michelle, and she's going to talk you through the elements of your budget. And when we call ourselves the budget Sherpas, we're not kidding, because this baby is
a hefty one.
burly. So take it away, Michelle.
Sure. So just to kind of walk you through the budget binder that's been put in front of you, we put some helpful resources at the very front, covering the schedules, the fund balance assignments, restricted fund balance, as well as some discretionary community support to kind of give you an idea of some of the discretionary funding. I've also provided in there some charts and graphs that cover your expenditures. Gives you kind of a breakdown by each elected official, what the budget's looking like for this year, as well as some 3-year information in there, so you can kind of get an idea when you're reviewing it, what you're looking at. There's also a 3-year expenditure total in there, so you can see what, as far as the budget has gone over the last 3 years, you can see where everything is trending. There's a preliminary summary, which Dina's going to cover here in a little bit, so you can get an idea of where everything is right now. And then we've also included in there right now where we're looking for revenue, personnel, capital, and B budget. And then within each of those, it's also giving you a synopsis of all the forms that all of the elected officials' departments have submitted. And then towards the back, or behind there where all the tabs are, it is broken out by elected official, and then within each elected official, there's their A budget, B budget, and C budget request, the forms that they submitted, and any corresponding information that they submitted. So if they submitted a C budget request, and we asked them to put together a cost-benefit analysis, so if anything that was done to support that request is included in there for your review as well. So you might notice there's some slight variances in numbers between what Dina had put together and then what I've got in there as well, but it's because things were changing so fast that we couldn't keep up with some of them. And then when you look at the VOCC numbers, all of the wage changes as well as the medical expenses is sitting under VOCC right now. Once it gets dispersed, then it'll obviously change the allocation. But for right now, when you look at it, it might seem a little skewed just because of that. So. Any questions on your binder?
Well done. Thank you.
So, and it's a lot to digest. So if you have Hello, hello. So I'm going to put this down because it's not working, and I'm going to let Michelle drive for me. So is Kim Riley on the line? Calling Kim Riley.
I can hear her.
We're turning you up. You're very, very soft right now.
There you go. You should be better.
Kim?
Oh, yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you, Dina, over the clicking.
Yeah, I don't even know how, unless some other people get off the line, I'm not sure how to
That's better.
fix that.
Can everybody hear
Now I
Kim?
Can everybody hear me okay?
That's better.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Kim.
Okay, Kim, I'm gonna hand this off to Kim. She's been working really hard with the fleet management group to supplement our vehicle purchases this year by buying new and handing down. So take it away, Kim.
Thanks, Dina. I wanted to thank both Dina and Michelle for incorporating fleet management into the annual budget process this year. I'd also like to recognize committee members Nick Snyder, Keith Hutchison, Isaac Ohm, Sergeant Chris Case, and our committee chair, Rich Hauser, for their collaborative work throughout the year. If you can you advance to the next slide? We're there. So this year we initiated a new process to obtain information from the departments about vehicle availability, vehicle needs on an ongoing basis. So we basically have a list now. Anytime something becomes available, we already know departments that have needs, and we can quickly transfer those vehicles to the new department. Also, we have, and we'll be able to analyze the information that we obtain in order to have an idea of new vehicle needs as we move into the coming budget year, which is what we put into place this year. So based on the slide, I see that you can see it. The information that we've received since January, we had 7 departments that submitted requests. Of those requests, we had a request for 3 new vehicles, which can be funded by restricted revenue. Therefore, it doesn't hit the property tax line, and those vehicles that are being replaced can trickle down to other departments that have needs. We also had a request for 2 new vehicles or newer all-wheel drive SUVs for a department that has high daily mileage going out to the outlying areas. So a real need for something that's dependable with all-wheel drive. They requested these vehicles in the FY20 cycle, and we've not been able to satisfy that. And then we also had a request for 5 used vehicles. Those 5 used vehicles being 2 trucks, 1 large SUV or truck, an all-wheel drive SUV, and an all-wheel drive SUV or sedan. So taking that information with everything that we had been provided as far as trickle down and things that would become available, we are recommending that we fund 2 new all-wheel drive SUVs due to the lack of SUVs being trickled down. And then we would be able to address all remaining requests with existing fleet made available through this new vehicle purchase and trickle down process. And then as we had discussed in a budget meeting, a status update in March, we're proposing that we add budget lines under the BOCC general account for the vehicle purchase and the trickle-down vehicle inspection and repair costs for vehicles that are transferring between departments, to be sure that the department that receives the vehicle is receiving something that we should be holding on to, first of all, after it's inspected, and then to cover the repairs to be sure that they're getting something that is safe and reliable. So we're proposing to add those line items so that they would be an existing budget under the BOCC, and then the commissioners would determine, where those vehicles need to be issued to which department based on the data that we have compiled. So are there any questions? The cost for that, we're estimating that the cost for the new vehicles would be $25,500 each. That's based on last year's projection, state contract price, and a slight increase. So we'd be looking at buying an FY20 vehicle. And then we would need to work with the auditor's department to determine an expense line for those vehicle repairs. We expect all of those expenses could be offset by the amount brought in from surplus vehicles that are auctioned off.
Kim, how much do you estimate for the maintenance portion?
I was looking at, for example, we had a vehicle go in, and it's such a great shared service, KCSO shop. looks at the vehicle, their employees are already being paid. So we had a complete overhaul done on a van that we use, and it cost us $300. So, I think that costs could vary, but I would think that maybe $2,500 would be a good starting point.
Okay, Kim, where did you say, for the 2 new SUVs, and you might have already touched on this, funding source?
Well, we have already existing under the BOCC general accounts, we have a line there, and by statute, that's where the revenue comes to. It's line 4831, gain or loss on sale of assets or property. The average over the last 3 years has been $30,000 coming in as revenue there. And I would like to, in the coming months, really take a look at our existing fleet. And looking at the list, there are several vehicles that are used minimally, if at all, that are listed as poor quality. The sheriff also has a substantial list that will be surplus when they get their new vehicles in. I think that we would be able to budget at least that $30,000, if not a little bit more.
Okay. And then if we decided that, we needed 60,000 for new vehicles, 30 would come from the revenue, and then 30 would just be general fund tax dollars. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Is that it, Kim?
That's all I've got. Did anybody have any additional questions?
Any questions for Kim? None? Thank you. Go ahead, Dina.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate it. I think this is going to be a good way for us to have at least a partially sustainable way to keep up on our vehicles and make sure that people are driving safe vehicles. So it's a good deal all the way around. So we're going to look at the preliminary summary, but we're also going to ask you, once we go through the sticky notes and look at the summaries, how you want to do the EO meetings. Right now, I've just sent out a basic working agenda for each elected official, and each elected official is kind of going to have their own style of how they do their meetings. So there'll be that as a starting point, and then after all the EO meetings are over, then we'll have deliberations meetings. Again, I just have a standard working agenda for those, but I think those will be flexing depending upon subject matter that we're talking about. So we can talk about that offline, but I just wanted to give you what's coming up next, because we're gonna have specific presentations, and once those are through, then you'll enter into deliberations and decide what you want to keep, what you want to cut, questions, analysis, things you want to see. If there's anything you think of today that you want some analysis about, if you have a question, just shoot an email to budget admins, and we'll be sure to get that information to you as quickly as possible. That applies to everyone. If you have a question or a question about your budget or about something, just let us know. Timeline. So coming up next week, there are there's four. There's 4 budget meetings next week for EOs. On Monday, District Court and Prosecutor will be presenting. On Wednesday, there's a marathon session for the BOCC because you have so many departments. But again, we can flex depending upon what you want to talk about. So that it's a good time now to think about, okay, what do we want to look at? So you can have time to look at your binders and decide what kind of things you want to talk about at your meeting. And then the assessor is tentatively set for Friday, May 7th. That could change depending upon availability, but that's what's on the books right now, and that's what's being noticed to the public. So any questions before we look at the preliminary summary?
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So let's pop over. There she is. Okay, this is going to be kind of hard to see, but I think what I'll do is I usually do a shout out after these meetings to everybody in the group so that you have a copy of this in the email. So this is where we are right now. Please don't mind the colors, but this was just our way of kind of keeping track of the numbers and what they do. So at the top portion in the green, that's our revenue sources. So right now, we've plugged in 3% and new growth. And I think the new growth is based on Celti's closing. If you click on that. So what we did is there's a couple different ways we can go. So we've got a low, middle, high on the new growth number. So assessor gave us a number, which is very conservative. And then this is the assessor's number with the Celtice URD closing, but we're not sure if that's going to close. And then there's a third number that's more optimistic. Click on there. That's based on what our new growth has been in a growth movement.
Question, you referenced Celtice closing, are you referring to the URD?
Yes.
Okay.
But we're not sure if that's going to close this year or if we're going to see those. Joe, you want to speak to that?
Yes, I've received word that it is in fact closing, but whether we could count the value, the increment value back to this year's new development role was in question.
When you say this year, do you mean 20 or 21? I want to make sure we're on the same page.
For our upcoming new development role, for this budget.
21?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
yes. So I'm working with Alan Dornfest with the State Tax Commission. We've received word, as long as they receive the official documentation, which is in process to be recorded right now, within the next few weeks, that it will be, in fact, for this upcoming new development role.
Okay, fine, thank you.
So that said, we can safely pick that middle number, but we know that it will, the middle value, I guess. So based on that, we have general government revenue with property tax, that's 3% plus the new growth first estimate.
Yeah?
Our non-property tax revenue, that's the revenue that everybody has forecasted. And like I said in the beginning, some of that's been forecasted downward, okay? So that's our fines, our fees, our licenses, that kind of thing, and state tax remittances, that kind of stuff. And then the restricted fund balance use, again, that's mainly grant money for existing grant positions that I popped in there because we know we're going to at least get that grant money, but we don't normally budget grants otherwise. So that's in there. So that gives us a total revenue in general government of $83,176,624. So make sense?
Go ahead.
So I have a space in there, and it's empty right now. For assigned fund balance use, this is where we're going to look at capital, and you're going to decide how much of that assigned fund balance you want to pop in there, and that will increase your revenue number to offset
Correct.
your deficit. Okay, so then the second part of this is your existing expenses. So that's where I talked about our total personnel as of today, everybody's rates as of today. I've got solid waste in the middle because they're self-funded. So at that far left government column, that's what has to be covered by tax money. The OpEx below it, that's our current amended without grants expenses. So this is our starting point. This is what we're spending this year right now. So those are our existing expenses without anything new. So that gets us to 80. That gives us about 3 million left over. So then if you go to the blue line that says new B OpEx ask, that's the total ask. And if I compare that and then you go down to the proposed increases, the OpEx B including the 2%, that's the incremental increase over last year. And keep in mind, everybody got a 2% increase. So the fact that we're at 0.12% of an increase rather than 2% across the board is pretty phenomenal. So I think we're looking good in the B budget area. Above the OpEx there in purple, those 3 purple lines there at the top, those are all represented by these beautiful sticky notes over here. So the new personnel A, all of these purples are new positions. All of the oranges are changes in personnel, overtime, that kind of thing. This here in green is new programs. So these are things that are new programs, not necessarily capital. like onboarding costs for new employees, those go into new programs. And then, last but not least, capital. We're at about 4.5 million for general government and capital asks, which is a record low since I've been here. Now, if you recall, last year when we were all standing here together, your deficit was about, what, 19 million? So, Michelle, if you want to scroll down just a bit, I'm very proud to show you your deficit is $5.5 million.
Far cry from the 19 million.
I think this just goes to show that people are really mindful of their budgets. And this is such a welcome surprise.
I
Just-
appreciate people looking at this year as an austerity budget. That's what
And
we
it
have.
really is.
Yeah.
It really is. So now that we've gone through all of that, I want to also mention some of these other things. So down here, and I'm going to walk over here because it's easier for me to Vanna next to the screen here. So wage study adjustments. So when we got together with Nancy and with Sylvia and our team working on the wage study, these were the adjustments to bring people to where they needed to be. We knew that last year that the wage study wasn't done. So this is to bring everybody where they need to be, but not the elected officials. They were excluded from this. So that's the amount countywide to fix everybody. There'll probably be a number in this square when we figure out how many of those are solid waste, and then that'll relieve some burden on taxation and tax dollars. So then, we had talked about how do we want to do raises this year. So we threw around some ideas. So the first idea was, nobody moves in steps, everybody's just going to get a flat COLA. So this COLA amount was chosen. So we popped this in here. Now there's other options out there, but for right now, about $750,000 to bump everybody 1.8%. And that's all we have budgeted in there right now. Now, that doesn't include step and grade, that doesn't include matrix moves, and this is figured on current wages. We also did a calculation to move everybody a step and then do a COLA. So the number changes if you elevate everybody and then tack on a COLA, or if you leave everybody where they are and then do a COLA. So we have all those calculations. We actually have them in this tab. Yeah, just briefly. Just to give you an idea, it's a lot of numbers, it might make your eyes bleed. But this part down here has to do with the COLAs and the steps. The upper part has to do with the fix, which, not as relevant right now. So the greens are the ones for the 1.8, that adds up to our 748.
Yeah, that's COLA only, right?
That's COLA only at 1.8%. So the blue squares take everybody's wages where they are right now and tack on a COLA at 1.8, a COLA at 2.6, and a COLA at 2.5. The green part bumps everybody up a step and then applies those same COLA percentages at the higher rate. So those are the numbers. Here's the cost we have in the budget right now, depending upon where you go with this. Those are all of the high-level calculations of the costs associated with step and grade COLA at various levels. It's like she can read my mind. Okay, and then health insurance I mentioned before. This is what Alliance is telling us now, based on claims through February, so that could change a lot. Last year, it went way down.
Yes, it
So
did.
this number could go down quite a bit.
Yeah, because last year they started at 17 or 18%. We wound up with, was it
Right.
6 or 8?
Yes, and we're starting at 10% right now.
Okay.
So we don't know. So it depends on claims. They'll look at our claims, and the more claims we have for them to average, the more accurate and probably the lower that number is going to be, but we want to be conservative. So that's your numbers on your preliminary summary.
Dina?
Any questions?
Yeah, I've been an employee a lot longer than I've been an elected official. And whenever I got COLA, was a cost of living to keep me even. It was not a raise. It was not a bump. It was just to keep me even.
Yes.
Is that how we're looking at this here?
We base the COLAs on consumer price index.
I see three different ones.
Yes, and so those were different indices. Nancy and Michelle went out and looked at all the indices. So we had, remember, we had the big general CPI nationwide, and then we looked at the regional CPI, and then we looked at it wage versus everybody.
I guess all I'm
basically.
saying is, I don't consider that a raise.
Right.
I consider that a keeping even.
Yes.
Yeah, you're just keeping
Yeah,
pace with the
that's-
rate
I
of
just want-
inflation.
Which, cost of living adjustment,
Yep,
yes.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Except considering the circumstances we're in, I don't think there's any valid COLA right now at all.
Well, I think you're
It's
wrong.
just not. I don't think that
Sorry,
we can do that.
nationwide, there is a COLA. Social Security recipients got a COLA.
So I'm talking about with the current economy and not knowing how it's going to react, rebound, and all that, I just don't think that there's a solid number that we can say, yes, this is representative, until we move forward a little bit more.
Okay, I didn't say there was a solid number, but I think it's very important to keep people at least up with and not have them fall back, because there's no sense in giving them a real raise last year and then turning around and taking 2% off by not keeping up, if there is in fact a valid COLA number.
Right, I'm just wondering how all the taxpayers and the people who have lost their jobs and lost their businesses, how they're, gonna survive, and then our people who have, we saw fantastic benefits up to, $6 an hour, that number broken down. So their wage plus $6 an hour is what they're making right now, and we have, millions across the nation, and even thousands in Kootenai County alone, who aren't making anything. So
So
that's,
we're
I'm
supposed to do-
taking
We're
in.
supposed to do penance and destroy our wage study?
I wouldn't call it penance at all. I would say,
I would.
let's be realistic and look at what is happening right here. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so, interesting discussion. Along these lines, are we making any projections for additional revenue from the state as a result of the whole COVID situation?
That's something that we'll be working on throughout the process. This is just the first look at consolidating what people came back with. Going forward now, during the elected officials' presentations, we're going to be digging into the numbers. We're going to be looking at trends. We're going to be looking at how things are going throughout the nation to try to get as accurate of a number as possible. But there's a lot of uncertainty. But yes, that is our plan, to start digging into these numbers now that we know that they're solid. And there's still a little change. So every time that there's an HR change or a status change form, that number changes.
And over time, we're going to be finding out what help the federal government can be to us financially.
Yes.
It doesn't come in one lump on one date.
And
So-
that's something else, I'm glad you bring that up, because right now there's, as I understand it, two sources of money. There's FEMA, which
Yes.
our EOC is looking at, and then there's the CARES Act. So we're looking at both. We have, of course, law enforcement looking at it. Our grants team is looking at it. You've designated a person specifically to deal with the CARES Act. I think we're positioned very well. So if you have expenses and you know that they're being driven by COVID, please let us know. We're actually looking at some expenses right now that are definitely COVID-related that we're going to reclass and put into that Fund 11. So if there's any labor associated with, say, for example, elections, we're having people working and, stuffing envelopes, and we have temp people who are coming in and helping. All of that should be coded to our COVID accounts. We took a very bold first step and set ourselves up right at the outset. So we've been able to track those costs through our system and keep people's budgets from going over the edge, because we're keeping those expenses separated. So I think we're positioned very well to be able to say, yep, these are our expenses, we can classify these expenses, and we can apply for reimbursement. So, excellent question. And leading into that, so everything up there is represented here, all the new asks in those purple lines. So,
Dana, a couple
Yeah.
questions. Okay, so the numbers that are reflected there, if you take us back up, what did
Yeah.
you assume for a property tax increase, if any? 3%?
Put in 3% in new growth. We did the full gambit.
Okay,
So the 3% is a pretty solid number. It's just based on last year, 3% of last year.
okay, so that's
Statutorily,
the one, roughly the 1.5
1 point,
million.
yeah, 1.5 million, that's our overtime, right? Okay, so that's our 3%. And then, again, that new growth number is gonna change. Chances are it'll probably go up, but we wanna be conservative. It's early and we wanna be conservative because we just don't know.
No, we don't. And the reason I brought up, funding, additional funding coming in from COVID is that, and I've read different things, so I don't know. But the one source that I read said that the state of Idaho is going to get $1.5 billion. And then I read that, well, and maybe this is yet another source, that we were going to get $350 million, of which the governor was going to disperse, I thought it was 40 or 44 million to the counties. Oddly enough, there are 44 counties. But that doesn't mean that a county of 25,000 is going to get $1 million. But it could mean that a county like Kootenai gets 3 million. I don't know. But again, this will all factor in.
But once again, that's probably one-time funds and not ongoing year after year, so
true.
we can't
It
use
helps
it to
nevertheless.
cover. I would like to start with 0%, and I'd like to see if we can get there, and then if we can't, then, we'll make adjustments. But this year, we started last year with 3%, we got there. This year, I'm gonna start with 0%. That's where I'm gonna go.
Do it. Start with 0. Let's see what happens.
Okay, great.
The thing that's fascinating, though, and we go through this a lot, I know a lot of you, or some of you in this room do, is that $1.5 million, that's against a total property valuation in the county of $20 billion. So when you put it in perspective, is it really that much money? So, anyway. But yes, we'll start at 0.
Keep new growth.
Yeah, keep new, yeah. Yeah, that's either properties coming on the tax rolls and/or URD closures. Still a far cry from the 19 million last
Absolutely.
year.
And we can change that. I mean, that's what those levers are for, and we can
And then-
change that.
But we also, grants still haven't been taken out, right?
Grants are in for what we budget for.
Okay,
So any personnel that's covered by grants, that's already in there.
okay.
That's that 380. So, do we want to take a break?
Yeah, let's do that. Be back at 10:05?
All right.
Okay, so we're recessing. We'll return at 10:05, 10-minute break. Thank you. Okay, so, thank you, everyone. We're resuming. The time is 10:07 a.m. Yeah, it is a.m., okay. If it were p.m., we'd be in trouble. Okay, and so, again, we're resuming our, essentially, I guess Clerk Brannon is right, it's really not much of a kickoff, but it's the initial consolidated budget review. Hosting us is our Finance Director, Dina Darrow. And Dina, our consultant, Sean Riley, wanted to speak with regard to VEBA. It was a question that came up earlier. Sean, go
Okay.
right ahead, please.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thanks. So I'm the only one in the room who actually has a VEBA account. And there's some people getting ready to retire, and I can tell you from personal experience, that thing's amazing. If you go into it with
Sean?
your max, if you go into it with your max hours, and a lot of us that have been there for a while, and especially that are exempt, you will go in there with that. It's an amazing account. When I had my head injury, we met our max out of pocket rather quickly, and I never spent a dime out of my personal account. It all came out of the VEBA. I mean, you know, the ambulance ride, everything came out of that, and then not only did you get it out of there, but you actually make money on the account. So what you'll get your packet when you get ready to retire, and it'll show you how to manage it and invest it and move it around. So I just wanted to bring that up. But a lot of people complain about, well, you know, they took half my sick pay from me. I got half my sick pay in there, and if I can maintain my health, I'll probably have enough money to pay my medical stuff for the rest of my life on my deductibles. So it's a really good plan. Don't cut it short.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And
Thanks, Sean.
I asked Dina to, for the benefit of the folks who are listening in, who might not be familiar with some of our terms, to explain restricted, because, go right ahead, please, Dina.
Sure. And Sean, don't get everybody excited about retiring. We need our people, please. Okay. So when we talk about fund balance, there's always a lot of questions about fund balance, and recently the clerk put out some information on his website on the different kinds of fund balances and how they're used. So you can refer to the clerk's site out on our Kootenai County website to look at those. But just to touch briefly, we use some terminology here that may be not familiar to the average person and definitely to someone in private industry. We use specific terms. So fund balance is basically what we have left over at the end. If you're a business, your fund balance is your equity. So in government, there's a lot of different kinds of fund balances. So we talk about the fund balance that we can use to pay for capital. That's assigned fund balance. That's our surplus above and beyond our unassigned fund balance, which is our 2 months of operating cushion. So those are assigned and unassigned. Restricted fund balance, there's a statutory restriction on how those funds can be used. So for example, boat launch. So people pay for boat stickers. That goes into the boat launch fund, and then only the boat launch fund can buy stuff with that money. It can't be sent up to the general fund to pay for something else. It has to stay within its fund. If the airport gets money from their rents, that money stays in their fund, and they can use that to pay for stuff in their fund, but we can't move it up into the general fund. So assigned, unassigned basically refers to the general fund, and restricted funds refer to all of those other special funds. So we're going to have some asks here, and I strategically,
Dina,
yeah.
what is the current unassigned, unrestricted fund balance? Yeah, unaudited.
Unaudited, is it about, what is it, Keith, about 11 million? It's maybe it's 14. I think it's 14 million. It's 2 months of operating and personnel, basically.
Healthy.
Yeah. And that's based on the fund balance policy that you guys put together last year. And that was best practices for our Government Finance Officers Association recommendation. So we carry 2 months of personnel and operating in our unassigned fund balance as a cash flow cushion, because revenues can be intermittent, and we collect taxes twice a year, so that helps buffer us
In
for
other
our
words, if we got
expenses.
no revenues for 2 months,
We'd be fine,
okay.
and then we would not be fine.
No, we-
So, okay.
And I just want to bring up that treasurer in the past has requested 3 months. And so I'm willing to look at that as we continue through the budget process. I know we just went through our assignment and then, this pandemic hit. And so I'm willing to go back and look at potentially, upping that 2 months, and not necessarily this year, but over the next 3 years, so we have 3 months in reserves.
Okay, I'm going to put that on the note board. So I'm using this empty sticky note panel to make some notes here. So Commissioner Brooks brought up a good point. All of these asks, some of them are mandated and some aren't. So over the course of the next week, I'm going to make sure that the ones that are mandated have an M on them. The other thing is this vocabulary trivia that we're talking about. So that's the whole fund balance thing. There's also non-spendable fund balance. Non-spendable fund balance basically is at the end of our year. It's bills that we owe. So if we have fund balance in there, we owe those bills. We can't spend that money on anything else but those bills. We're obligated to pay those bills. So that's the other kind of fund balance. So that's the fund balances we deal with. Other trivia, fun words that we use. I refer to operating expenses as OPEX. I refer to capital expenses as CapEx. That's just a throwback from my private sector days. Was there any other weird words I use maybe that?
I'll raise my hand when I.
Okay, so I'm going to depend on Bill to point out any weird words that we should define, because really this is, again, this is a team sport. We use a specific vocabulary in finance, and us finance people talk amongst ourselves a lot. We don't get out much, so we forget, that we're talking this strange language. So,
And we're in a new era where we're live online.
yes.
People watching at home who can't raise their hand and go, what does OPEX mean?
Right.
So,
And again, and if the public is watching, please reach out to our public records system, the clerk's public records page. We're happy to answer any questions, send you information if you need it. If you have questions about terminology or just about the budget in general, we're happy to send that to you. So just reach out via online. There's an online form.
Okay.
So I've added the 1 month unassigned fund balance idea up here. If you think of anything, if anything sparks an idea, please speak up. So I'm going to go quickly through these, and then if you have questions, then we can stop and talk about them. But I think all of this, all the detail is in your binders, and I think we've covered a lot of information today, and it's been almost 2 hours since I've had a cup of coffee. So I'm thinking we go through these, answer some questions, and call it a day, call it a weekend, and enjoy day one of phase one of our freedom. Mm-hmm. So again, new programs in green. So these are onboarding costs. My team has asked again for the internal auditor contractor, just as a placeholder again, and the board tasked IT and finance with looking at some new ERP systems.
ERP.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Excellent. Enterprise resource system. So basically our financial system, our payroll system, our HR system, all integrated into one system. You know that system as Tyler, Logos, New World Systems. So we're at about 12, what are we at, James? 12 years with New World? Okay. So it's getting a little long in the tooth. It's got some gray hairs. So we're just looking at some other options. So we started looking at options, and there's a whole lot. So we went to some consultants and said, hey, you guys do this for a living. You can look at what we have, look at what our needs are, and then make some recommendations that are agnostic. So we looked at some consulting firms that didn't have any deals with any software companies and that were highly rated, and talked to them. So that particular ask is to have a consultant come in and do a full audit of all of our systems and all of our ancillary systems to give us some recommendations on what would be appropriate for the county going forward. again, this is just a far-looking future thing, but we put it up there. The search and rescue dive team has an ask in here for $8,000, so that they have a placeholder, that they're not just running off of donations, but that they actually have some money that they can count on because their operation runs, you know, pretty regularly. And then the rest of this is basically onboarding for some new people that are in purple here. We normally put the onboarding separate because, you know, we don't put in personnel, a desk, or a computer and things like that. Okay, so new people. So we've got veteran services, and I put the number of FTEs here, and you'll have all this in your summary, but we've got an FTE for veteran services. E911 has a request for 2 FTEs for ECHO officers. Animal control has asked for 1 FTE for a lead officer. Prosecutor has 2 AT3s and a legal assistant. Parks and Waterways has a maintenance operator that they've asked for that would be shared between parks and snow groomers, so part of that would be paid for by restricted funds. District Court has some asks, and I think there's going to be, Marissa, you said there's going to be one more coming? Okay, so there's going to be a little movement here, but basically judicial assistants, some clerks in our collections arm that we started last year, that's ramping up. So that could be partially funded by revenue. So there's an ask there to have a more full-time person there doing those collections. And then a help desk coordinator, because as we become more technically reliant, Marissa spends a lot of time running around district court trying to fix things and hook things up. So it would be nice to have somebody who could help her with that so she can focus on her duties. So that's 1 FTE in there. Carlene has some asks here for an administrative assistant, a deputy trial court administrator, a couple of bailiffs, and then solid waste has an equipment operator ask, 1 FTE, and airport has a request for 2 operations specialists. So that's all the new people, and that'll be in the upper section of your listing of personnel. And then all of these oranges are you can see the OTs here. Those are all overtime asks. I won't go through every single one of those. There's a couple where we're converting some positions. So coroner has a part-time person that he would like to convert to a full-time person. That would cost about $20,000, so that one's in here. And then recall that at the outset of our budget, we said that all of the overtime asks last year, that those would all roll back. So a lot of these overtime asks are repeats from last year because we're starting with that lower number. So, and in the coroner's case, this on-call pay is the same kind of thing. It's last year's on-call pay being asked for again this year. And then we have some regrades down here for assessor. And solid waste has an existing bonus pool. They have more employees. They just need a little bit of a bump there. All of these solid waste down here, as you recall, restricted funded. And then there was some special duty pay in here for KCSO records. I don't see any holiday buyback in here, so good on you there. So that pretty much encapsulates new programs and personnel. So then on to CapEx. So up here at the top, I kind of have just some odds and ends. This green one in the corner is $700,000 for year 2 of 3 of the sheriff's vehicles lease. The latest I've heard is that the Ford factory is shut down, their assembly line, so they might get their cars by the end of July. So we're still coordinating that. So the money's there, the lease is funded, but we have to wait for the factory to put the cars together. So that's where that's at. So this one will have to stay because we're committed to that one. So then when Kim was talking about vehicles, I went ahead and popped in, and I did them at $30,000 each because last year we had them at $30,000 each. So I popped in 2 for community development. That's those 2 new ones, and then the trickle down would happen from those 2 ones. Veteran Services has asked for some furniture for their lobby, about $8,000. Airport has asked for a pickup. Again, they have restricted funds. They could pay for it that way if you want to go that direction. And then we have some IT asks that have to do with network, firewall, document imaging. This is a project that would replace paperclip. So it's a really great program. As we look at new ERP systems, most of the new ERP systems have that integrated into the system out of box. So that's something to think about when you're making your decision and you have those last few cuts to make. It's like, okay, this would be really great, but you know, how far out are we in ERP? If we're 3 years out on ERP, we may have to go that direction, but just a little backstory to think about that. Spillman, some upgrades to Spillman here. A SAN for 911. The software that community development did not get last year is back up here at 260. We have the coroner's lab, 751. In the middle here, a lot of maintenance type items. So what I did on here, where it says F11, that's our construction fund. So for the jail, we've got some fun accessories for the jail. I won't read them out loud. Some of them are, you know, urinals. Okay. So there's a pole barn in here. There's a work release remodel in here for professional standards. And then there's just a lot of maintenance-y kind of things like locks, heat pumps, rooftop HVAC, and then the camera system at the jail. That's a big one that Captain Deke was very adamant about, that the camera system was end of life in the jail. And then the jail classification software for inmates coming in, that was another real critical item for him. And you'll see all of that. Michelle put together a whole new form system this year, and I know a lot of us labored over adding so much more information, but I think it really helps you make your decision, because not only is there a narrative, but there's also a cost-benefit analysis associated with each ask. So you can really see where the payback is over time on some of these investments that you make. So then down here, juvenile detention, let's see, some other things for jail maintenance. And then down here in blue, I have 3 items, and I just spoke to Jennifer. These are all for elections. There is some grant money available, so we're going to be looking at expenses that have already happened that are COVID-related. We can use those expenses for match, and these items may be able to be taken care of this year. So all
Awesome.
these 3 may just completely come off. So that's encouraging. I put a little happy COVID sticky there to mark those. I didn't go into detail with solid waste because, again, they're self-funded, and this is just an ongoing operation. So they're $2.1 million of capital asks. Pretty low for this year, but that's all self-funded. So they just got 1 sticky for the whole thing. The detail is in your binder. The fair has an ask for a master plan, $300,000. Juvenile detention has some radios, about $51,000. Airport is asking for a toolcat and some lease software. Again, they have restricted funds if you would, you determine that you want them to pay for it that way. With software, there's always some ongoing expense, maintenance expense to consider, and that'll be in your cost-benefit analysis. There's some other things in here for patrol, some more radios for patrol, 20 replacement radios for patrol, $131,000. And then in this corner, like I mentioned before, a lot of this, parks, waterways, snowmobiles, assessors, reval, these are all spelled out, E911. All of these items have restricted funds that can be used, so I've grouped them all together.
Dina, is it possible to just put those, 'cause you showed us the blank space, can we just put all of those in restricted so we know how much lower our $7 million gap is? And then as we have the presentations, we can go over them one by one. So I'm not saying we're approving them, I'm just saying
Okay.
let's go ahead and put them all in.
So we can
as
plug
if.
those in the budget.
Yeah, it's just cleaner.
Okay, so do you want to plug the airport asks too?
Well, in that case, with regard to the toolcat, he's getting virtually assured $69,000 from COVID.
Okay.
So that might be this year, so that may not
And
be
that's
in
probably gonna be this
21
year, that's
budget.
correct.
Okay.
Stephen, can you speak to that?
Talk about the toolcat, Stephen. The 69,000. He's not there.
I think we bored him to death.
He's expecting that this year, I think you're right.
This isn't boring. Look at this rapt audience.
That's why we have you here.
Okay.
So basically, that's all of it. Any questions, anything here that you want to address individually? In your binders, part of the beauty of what Michelle put together is there's a page that just summarizes all of these, and it has all the information in cells across of everything that was put into the form. So it's basically the forms in a tabular format. So you can go find an ask, and you can just go to the right, and you can see all of the information.
Color-coded.
It also has the person's name attached, so whoever sent in that ask, you can just call them up and ask them
Good job.
ahead of time.
Good job.
So hopefully, it's all her.
What's her?
Thank you, Michelle.
22? Michelle? Nice job.
She's a rock star. I don't know how we do this without her. So there's your new asks.
Okay. Stephen, did you come back on the line?
Okay, so the toolcat, the 69,000, when do you expect to receive it?
We should, the application was just submitted yesterday. As soon as we can get all the paperwork in line with the FAA, we should be able to receive the funds fairly quickly. As a timeline, it should be before the budget is over.
Okay,
Okay.
so this fiscal year,
Yes.
before the end of September.
Yep.
Okay?
Very good, very good.
So then we should pull that.
Yeah, pull it.
Okay. I'm going to do that because it's fun to actually physically do something like
Right.
this.
Electronic
It's not just a spreadsheet. We've made it the real deal. Okay. There we go. Okay. So the last thing before we all get a cup of coffee, I wanted to share with you our timeline and where we are. So we are, auditor presents, there we are right there. That square right there. And here's where we finish. So we are pretty much smack dab in the middle. So next steps, EO meetings. Then we're going to have some deliberations. Then we're going to have
You mentioned EO meetings, deliberation. Oh, BOE. Oh,
BOE.
BOE, yes.
So BOE is going to be in the middle of your deliberations, but because this deficit is so small, I'm thinking we could get done really early and everybody could enjoy their summer. So even though this is our statutory deadline and we will be having our hearing at the end of August, I think that this team can get this done in record time.
I have a very lofty goal. I would like, after all the EO meetings, to be done. So maybe even have just one deliberation session and be done. So we'll see what we can make happen.
See what we can do.
That would be a record.
It would be a record, absolutely.
No, no argument. And, you know, as we're allowed to get out and do our lives again, to be able to say, yep, we're good, I think everybody would just be overjoyed. I think that'd be the best gift you could give us all. So that's all I had. I can answer any more questions.
Any questions for Dina? Yes, Dan, please.
We touched on this yesterday in the email, but on the deliberation schedule, I think we tallied up the number of hours that was sent out in those invites for the deliberations. And obviously, it's going to be hard for everybody to attend all of that. Absolutely. I just was wondering if somebody had some thoughts on how best to deal with that. Because Go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I would say that we need to, if we can't get through it all after the elected officials meetings, then we say, okay, we bring back the biggest chunk. And let's say it's BOCC departments.
case, yeah.
Yeah, and so then we say, okay, this deliberations is for BOCC departments only. This deliberations is for, I'll pick on the treasurer because they have, there's no backup paperwork. They're not asking for anything. So, you know, we would absolutely, I was here 2 years ago for the process, and it was a mess because you dealt with 4 or 5 elected officials in one 2-hour session. And I don't want to ever do that to anybody. So I would say, and Dina, we've talked about this a little bit, it would be, okay, this deliberation is set aside for sheriff. This deliberation is set aside for them. But I'm thinking, really, with 7 million, and already we can cut probably 2 off that board. But I have to read my precious before I cut anything. So, yeah, we would absolutely let everybody know, and maybe even giving you an option, hey, we have 2 deliberations next week. Which one do you guys want to pick?
To me, that makes perfect sense. What happened in times before was that, if you weren't at a certain session, then something could come up that involved your department and you weren't there. And I'm just trying to avoid that from happening. So what you're proposing, I think is a great idea. If you just label who's supposed to be when and where, well, that makes sense.
But not only that, I found things that were cut, then added back, and it just all became so incredibly confusing when you commingle different departments. And so I'd love to just keep it, even if we have to split our deliberations into 1-hour segments so we can have, 2 or 3 that day. But my goal, seriously, people, you guys did a rock star job. I think we can cut 7 million in our EO meetings and really have very little deliberations.
Just to address Dan's point, when I requested that those invites go out, traditionally we have to set aside budget blocks because the BOCC's calendar fills up so fast. It's like, okay, do we have enough budget blocks for deliberations? And it's like, okay, we want full disclosure for all the electeds because this is a team sport. So it was more of a heads up so that landed on your calendar, and then you could decide, okay, this one's coming up. I better go look at the agenda to see, is this something I care about attending, or do I want to just tune in on YouTube for this one? So it wasn't meant to fill your inbox with a ton of meetings that you had to go to. It was more from a visibility standpoint. And to Leslie's point too, we're probably not going to need all those budget blocks, but traditionally we've always just grabbed them as soon as we could because they fill up so quick, and we want to make sure that they have enough time to deliberate.
Bill, thoughts?
No, sounds very well planned, thought out, and I'm happy to see it's not $19 million.
We're all happy for
I
that.
almost had a stroke last year when I saw it, but we cut it down.
Anyone else thoughts? No? Okay, I'll share a couple of mine. Back to the 19 million, again, for the benefit of the folks who are listening in. When we started this very same process a year ago, the asks that came in from the various departments were $19 million over the previous year. We managed to whittle it down to, what did we ultimately wind up with? I guess 2.4. This year, I think we're off to a great start. Last year, I think we made great progress because the sessions were more collegial than they had been in the past. It went faster, and I've heard from a few of you that you'd never seen it go as smooth as it did last year. Credit, once again, our finance team, Nancy Pluff, and really everyone here for participating. And what we did last year, I think, is we came to, a general consensus that said, look, if we're going to implement a wage plan, something has got to give. You can't have everything and those level of increases that we distributed. And I would almost say the same thing again. We're going in with an assumption, at least for now, of a 0% tax increase. Is that doable and still taking care of the wages? It may actually be doable. I don't know. It's too soon to tell. We don't know what kind of revenue's coming in from the state. To Leslie's earlier point, she's already identified, I think, a couple of $1 million that we can take out. Let's work together, take another hard look at those capital asks, and see if we can do what we need to do and make good on the rest of the wage plan. Yeah, go right ahead, Leslie.
Well, you mentioned capital asks. So we also have assigned fund balance, which means money that about 14 million, so 14 million that we don't look at all, because that's our cash reserves, and then 14 million that we could actually spend on some capital asks. So we can still stick to a 0% by using a little bit of our fund balance for relevant matters. So I just want the people at home to understand that, you know, we still have a lot of room here to fulfill the needs to be able to serve the public and not raise our taxes.
And we have not been discussing foregone taxes.
Right.
No, you didn't say it, and thank you. But I mean, we didn't even have to say it.
Okay.
What I will say too is the 5 million that's in this year's budget, we're not building a new building. So if you add that back to the assigned fund balance, that puts us at 19 million,
Yes, yeah.
just for fun.
Okay. Public comment. Hearing none. 10:38, meeting adjourned. Thank you again. Great job, everybody. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the phone.